All right, well, welcome everybody. Thank you for being here with us this morning. Happy Friday. My name is Katie Earle. I'm the coordinator of the University Express program, and I work for the Erie County Department of Senior Services. We're all joined here virtually today with Rob Kubiak, and we're happy to have him. But before we jump to his presentation, again, we do have some new folks here, which is great, so I'll just go over a couple housekeeping things. We are recording this session, and I will try to post it on our website in the near future. For you, when you joined, you've probably noticed by now that you're muted without a video of yourself showing. Can't do anything about it. It's not because you've done something wrong. It's just the settings I have for this program, so no worries there. And I also promise you're not the only one here in attendance with Rob and I today. Just we're in anonymous participation mode, so only Rob and I know who and how many of you are in here. So we'll be communicating with you primarily through our Q&A feature. So depending on your device, when you logged in, the Q&A panel may have popped up on the right side of your screen. You just have to click that caret to expand it down, and then you should see the text box where you can type in your comments and questions and send those to me, and we'll try to get to as many as we can during this time. If you're not seeing that, if you're on a computer, if you look at the lower right hand of your screen, you should see a little half circle thing with a square and a question mark in it for Q&A. And then last but not least, if you're on a tablet or phone, poke or touch your screen, you should see your control panel pop up, a button with 3 dots, and then you should have your Q&A panel. So we hope you participate, have some fun with us. So I'd like to thank the sponsors of our program. It's my Department of Senior Services, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Western New York, Excelsior Orthopedics, and Wegmans, because they help make the program possible. If you've seen me before, you know I'm going to tell you to don't hesitate to call Senior Services if you have questions about program services or benefits for yourself or a loved one. We'll do whatever we can to help you out. We're at 858-8526. Now I'm going to introduce Rob to you. With over 20 years of leadership experience and creative problem-solving facilitation, Rob brings out-of-the-box ways to overcome challenges using proven techniques. Rob has led teams and worked with organizations as a successful change agent. He resides in Orchard Park with his wife and 3 daughters, and we're so happy to have him here today. So, Rob, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Katie, and good morning to all of our participants. I'm really excited to share a little bit of information with you about a topic that is kind of near and dear to my heart, and that's the principles of persuasion and influencing. And, you know, as far as before we kind of get into the presentation, I want you to think a little bit more about your day-to-day activities and consider all the times throughout the day that you have the power to influence something. And keep that in mind as we go through today's slides. So we're going to get started and go through a few quotes, which some of them you may have seen, some of them might be a little bit different. First, starting off is with Aristotle here. In making a speech, one must study 3 points. First, the means of producing persuasion. Second, the language. Third, the proper arrangement of the various parts of the speech. Jeffrey Gitomer. Jeffrey is a salesman. He's well known for many of his books that he's written about sales. Selling is a natural skill. It's developed as a child. You may know it as persuasion. Our friend Ben Franklin, he went on to say, if you would persuade, you must appeal to the intellect, to interest rather than intellect. And I'll read through these slides just for those that are calling in as well. Mary Kay Ash, if you're familiar with Mary Kay, she started a very successful line of products, a Mary Kay line. Pretend that every single person you meet has a sign around his or her neck that says, make me feel important. Not only will you succeed in sales, you will succeed in life. And our friend Clint Eastwood, it takes tremendous discipline to control the influence, the power you have over other people's lives. There's Aristotle again. And Abraham Lincoln, if you wish to win a man over to your ideas, first make him your friend. So what we're going to talk about today is really changing people's behaviors. And when you think about persuasion, sometimes people might say, you know, I don't want to be persuaded, or it kind of has a negative connotation to it. But in reality, we're all throughout the day persuading, whether it's with our spouse, our partner, our children, or grandchildren. And so when you give that some thought as we kind of go through today's presentation, I'm going to go through some examples about persuasion as well, and hopefully you'll learn a little bit more about it. So just another quick background. I kind of just threw this up to give you a little bit more experience or a little bit more flavor for who I am. I've over the past 20 years, I've worked in marketing, either at an agency or at Blue Cross Blue Shield recently. Now I'm a director of marketing and PR for a nonprofit organization called CompHere. But throughout my entire life in marketing and communications and PR, we've all kind of embrace some of the tactics of persuasion. So I do have a little bit of a background on that, and I'm happy to share that a little bit today with you. So for today's session, my goal is to help you understand some of the terminology when it comes to persuasion, expand the number of tools that are in your toolbox when it comes to influencing others, defend yourself against some weapons, and that's kind of maybe a negative term, but once you kind of know the principles of persuasion, you may be able to recognize them throughout your day and say, wait a second, what am I being told to do here, or what's being influenced upon me? Use some strategies that could preserve your relationships, and of course, learn something new. That's what the purpose of University Express is, and I hope you do that today. So persuasion is dead, or is it? This is a book that was recently came out by Bob Garfield and Doug Levy. It's a shift from the consumer era to relationship era. So in the grand scheme of things, prior to social media, a lot of the tactics that were used in advertising or marketing was really more geared toward directly on the consumer. The company was talking specifically to the consumer about a product or a service, and there really wasn't a ton of engagement with the consumer itself. But with social media so prevalent in today's society, a lot of companies have switched to the relationship era because they're engaging with us on a day-to-day basis, and there are things that we can comment on and like or dislike, and it's up to the company's responsibility to respond to those. So it's an emphasis on cultivating those relationships, providing authentic content, and avoidance and blatant acts of persuasion, marketing using social media. I think the one thing that comes to mind is genuine. Whether you are active on social media or not, it's important to be genuine. And the same thing is true for companies that are trying to pitch a product or a service. If it comes across as disingenuous, then people are going to realize that. So I think that's the key to relationship era, is being genuine. And if you had to convince your spouse or partner to go to the doctor, what we do, I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. And habitual persuasion, what is it? I think that's kind of habitual persuasion is the tendency to always go back to the same type of tactic when it comes to persuasion. So if you're always trying to convince somebody to do something, whether it's a child, for me, I've got 3 daughters, and it could be convincing them to do their homework at night, or convincing them that they should spend some more time reading. What are some of the things that I do on a day-to-day basis? Do I get trapped in those same types of habits where I'm going to say, well, you need to do it because you're not going to have there will be a consequence if you're doing it. If I continue to use that type of approach, I'm going to get the same type of reaction to it. So I have to be able to toggle back and forth between some of the tactics that I use when trying to persuade my children to read, for example. So we have a tendency to get into some habits when it comes to persuasion. There's nothing soft about communication. Soft skills are things like people skills. You may have heard that term before, but there's really nothing soft about communication. Persuasion skills are listed as necessary and in demand. It's a skill most worth learning for 2020. Of course, changing minds is a skill that will never go out of style. It's been happening since the inception of time, is to change minds, whether it's world leaders, local, state officials, etc., companies, of course. Changing minds is a skill that will never go out of style. You could have a great product or service, but you still need to convince others to buy it. Telling narratives, you must be persuasive. So when it comes to marketing, whether it's you're marketing yourself or you're marketing a product or a service, telling that story in a persuasive manner will get people to either listen to you or engage in your company or your product or engage in you and your conversation. Of course, we're at the time of year where we're less than a month away from an election, and of course, the candidates that are out there, they're trying to persuade the voters which way to go. And so sometimes that's done in a variety of different tactics, and we have to be able to recognize those things as well when they come up. An economist and a historian estimates that 1/4 of the US economy is attributed to persuasion skills. And that's expected to increase by 40% in the next 20 years. So if you think about persuasion, you think about communication, you think about your role right now in life, whether you're almost retired, semi-retired, or retired, those persuasion skills are going to be very important as you continue on throughout your life. Changing minds, it's done every day. When you think about persuasion attempts, there's I put that there, the Buffalo Bills are good enough to win the Super Bowl. Change my mind. So are you persuading your kids? Are you persuading your grandkids or your children? Pets. I've got a dog right here that's that may be barking at some point down the road during this call, and I might need to persuade that dog to stop it. So, we're even persuading pets. And of course, like I said, the spouse, people in your community, are you trying to persuade others into accepting ideas that you want them to believe in? So every single day, unless you are sitting in bed and not doing anything, you are either being persuaded to a certain extent or you're trying to persuade. So what exactly is it? I'll go through a definition right here. Persuasion involves symbolic communication between two or more people or pets with the intent to change, reinforce, or shape attitudes, beliefs, values, or behavior. I'll repeat that one more time for those that are on the line. Persuasion involves symbolic communication between two or more people with the intent to change, reinforce, or shape attitudes, beliefs, values, or behavior. So just I want to do an exercise and you could think about this. What would you do to persuade your spouse or a friend to get a colonoscopy screening? So that's a question that came up during a presentation that I had recently. What do you think that you would do to persuade your spouse or a friend to get a colonoscopy screening? I know that I believe that there's a chat function in WebEx, and I would be curious if you were to take a minute and think about that and submit your responses via chat. And maybe Katie, you can monitor that and see what comes up. Is that in the lower right-hand corner of the screen?
Yeah.
Yes, perfect. All right. So we'll come back to that in a few minutes, but if there are some responses, I would just be curious to see what you think about that. So what would you do and what would you say? All right. What would you do and what would you say? All right. So Robert Cialdini, he wrote this book. It's called Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. I have a copy of it right here, and you can see it on the screen. He's a Harvard Business Review lists Dr. Cialdini's research and breakthrough ideas for today's business agenda. He's a New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and USA Today best-selling author. Fortune magazine lists influence in their 75 smartest business books that CEOs read, and one of the top 100 business books of all time. So I'm going to get into some of the concepts that Robert Cialdini covers in his book called Influence. And it's really around 6 principles of persuasion. And those 6 principles are reciprocity, scarcity, authority, commitment, consensus, and likability. So those 6 principles of persuasion we're going to get through today during today's discussion. The first one is reciprocity. So think about reciprocity. The times that maybe you have a friend or a family member that gives you something. Could be a gift, could be a flower, and you want to return something for that gift or whatever it is that you've been given. We feel obligated to return favors to people who have done favors for us in the past. So think about that. We might have an obligation to do something in return for something that's been done for us. Just as an example, I recently had to do some housework for outside, fixing a patio area, and I have a cousin that was able to do that. Well, in return for some of that work that he was able to provide for me, he had asked me if I'd be willing to help out, at his cabin, doing some work at his cabin. And of course, I felt obligated to help him because he had helped me. So thank you notes. Why thank you notes when it comes to reciprocity? When we send a thank you note for something that we received, we want to obviously give something back to that person. If we just received that gift and didn't send a thank you note, then we're not being reciprocal in terms of our kindness. So thank you notes are extremely important, especially handwritten thank you notes. And the rule, pay every debt in kind. So straightforward way to use reciprocity: do a favor and expect one in return. So that is a principle of persuasion, is reciprocity. One example of reciprocity, and I put this cartoon up there, for those that are listening in, I think it's Dilbert was the cartoon, and someone in his office saying, "Uh-oh, my babysitter canceled for tonight." An idea, do you like kids? I will not watch your kids tonight. Well, I was going to ask you to adopt them. Absolutely not. The best I could do is watch them tonight. So that's kind of the concept of door in the face is and I've got a UPS driver coming, so you might hear that dog. The idea of reciprocity when it comes to the door in the face mentality is you start with something big, knowing that you may not get that big thing, and then you go back to that smaller thing. So, for instance, like I said, I've got 3 daughters. I'll use an example. Well, can I get a new softball mitt? Well, no, you can't get a new softball mitt. A new softball mitt is probably going to be $80, $100. Well, okay, can I get a new batting mitt? And knowing that my daughter wanted the batting mitt to begin with, she might start with something big, like a baseball mitt. And of course, you cave in when something like that happens. So the door in the face is an example of reciprocity in a interesting way, because you start with something bigger and then you go to something smaller. So think about the times throughout your day where you might be able to use that as a tactic in your own persuasion. Maybe it's maybe you're talking to your kids, if you've got kids that have they might have their own kids, so you could be a grandparent or some fashion. You want to take a family vacation, and you could say, well, how about we rent a condo in Florida? And your children say, like, condo in Florida, well, that's pretty far. We've got to make arrangements, all these other things. And then you say, well, okay, well, how about we just rent a cabin at Allegheny? Like knowing that you might have just wanted to spend that time and with your family, the best option could be just going to Allegheny. But you might start with something big like Florida and then come back to Allegheny. Just an example of door in the face. All right. The second principle of persuasion that we're going to get into is scarcity. So, what is scarcity? All right, I've got something on the screen here for those that are, like I said, listening in. It's a picture of a crowd of people inside of a store. I'm not sure, it looks like a department store, and it says sale everywhere. So there's probably 30, 40 people in this picture. They're walking around. Of course, you would never see this right now because of COVID. But the concept of scarcity is something like a crowd of people like that. My next slide shows exactly that. It's a Black Friday event. And so when people are motivated, scarcity is when people are motivated by loss rather than by gains. So what am I going to miss out on if I'm not taking advantage of a certain scenario? It's limited time sales. It's like I said, Black Friday. Call now. This offer will not be available for the next 2 hours, something like that. So scarcity is the concept of trying to get in on something for fear of losing out. And that's what that is. It's FOMO is the fear of missing out. So that's exactly what that is. The concept of FOMO. I'm going to miss out if I'm not taking advantage of this particular opportunity. So how is the strategy used? Like I said, Black Friday, recall a time when someone used this to persuade you. Was it effective? It could be, you're going out to dinner. You don't want to go out to dinner. It's a group of friends that maybe you haven't seen in a while, but you're just not feeling up to it. And your friend says, how many more times are we going to be able to get together, especially in the midst of COVID? And you're like, oh, all right, I'll go. So it's that concept of missing out because you don't want to miss that opportunity to do something, whether it's purchasing a new TV on Black Friday or going out to dinner with your friends. How might you use it? I'm going to leave that up to you. You can think about that. And the psychological reactance theory, the Romeo and Juliet effect. I'll just touch upon this really quick. Of course, the story of Romeo and Juliet by Shakespeare is that Romeo and Juliet, they wanted to get together. They wanted to be together. And because their families did not want them to be together, the more they wanted them to be, the more Romeo wanted to be with Juliet and vice versa. So that's kind of the psychological reactance theory. And that is a concept that is part of scarcity. The more that you want something, that there's the tendency to go after it. So that's kind of a little bit about scarcity. Before I get into authority, I'm just going to go back to Katie here to see if we had any, and I could probably check that too, to see if there was any responses.
Yeah, we have a couple.
All right.
Oh, some feedback. I would tell them how important it is to have that done. The second thing we have, I would say that it's no big deal. You can even be put to sleep. And then the last one I'm seeing is, hello, we're from Canterbury Woods in the skilled nursing facility. Our responses for how to persuade would be to tell them it isn't that bad and it's very quick. They would speak from their experience of having one before.
That's great. Those are all great responses. So I'll probably come back to that question a little bit later, because the more that you go through these slides or listen to the presentation, you might change your approach a little bit. Who knows? All right, so let's talk a little bit about authority. So authority. I think everyone might know who that is by now. I think since April. That's Dr. Anthony Fauci. All right. Now, why is an example of Dr. Anthony Fauci an example of authority when it comes to persuasion? Well, I went to Wikipedia, and here it hosts all the awards and honors that Anthony Fauci has received over the years. I'll just go from the most recent, which was back in 2018. Couple honorary doctors of science from American University and Boston University and Johns Hopkins University and all these other different awards. And so when you have someone that has the credentials, whether it's academia or whether it's just purely from years of professional experience, there's the concept of authority. That person, whether it's a woman, whether it's a man, you would believe them, or there's the tendency to believe them because they have that experience and because they have those credentials. So that's the concept of authority. So when you think about here within Western New York, there's Dr. Gail Bernstein, who's our Erie County Department or Health Commissioner. You know, when she comes on and talks about where we're at in terms of COVID, you listen to her because she has that authority. She's in a position of power. She has the credentials because she's a doctor, and she's telling you something that you need to know. So authority is definitely an tactic of persuasion. Let's see. Are you an authority, or how do you know? So think about your own experience. You know, if you've been working in a certain industry for a number of years, you would be considered an authority. You know, like for myself, I've been working in marketing for 20 plus years. I know a little bit about persuasion. So I contacted Katie and I said, how about we do something about persuasion? She said, okay, you've got some credentials around it. You've got a little bit of authority. Ethos. So what is ethos? I wanted to touch upon that. That's talked about in the book. And ethos is sometimes called an appeal to ethics, then is used as a means of convincing an audience via the authority or credibility of the persuader, be it a notable or experienced figure in the field or even a popular celebrity. Ethos is a concept that is really important because just because someone has a position of power and authority, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're able to persuade someone. You know, you could think about today's politicians, for an example. I'm not going to say whether one side is right or one side is wrong, but when they don't act with ethos, there's a tendency to not to tune that person out. And so, you know, I think when it comes to credibility and when it comes to authority, you know, you have to have ethos. You have to have ethics in order to persuade others and for others to do something that that you would want them to do. So what's your credibility and how do you obtain it? I think over the course of time, your character and your credibility speaks for itself. And so you're able to build that over the course of your career. And now for those of you that are on the line, you may be reaching a point in your career where you do have authority. You do have the credentials. So if you're trying to persuade a friend to do something, your children, your grandchildren, you have that authority. You've been around, you've been doing things for a while. So you have a little bit of that authority. It comes to competence and character and caring. That's part of authority. You know, like I said, when you think about those that are in positions of power, and I'll go back to Dr. Anthony Fauci or Dr. Gail Bernstein, they're competent, they do have character, and they're caring. They want to do something for the good of all. And think about what are the characteristics of a leader, you know, when it comes to authority. You know, whether it was a manager that you might have worked for in the past, or whether it was, you know, the head of a local, state, or federal government, What are the types of characters that were espoused in that particular person? So we're going to go on to the next principle, which is commitment. Commitment and consistency I put in parentheses. So what does that mean? People are most likely to do what is consistent with what they've done in the past. So when it comes to persuasion, you may have a tendency to do something because you feel comfortable because you've done it in the past. So I'll use an example. Going to church, so you belong to a church. You obviously, you might go to services, whether it's once a week, once a month, whatever, and someone tries to persuade you to go to a different church. It could be same denomination, it could be something different. You just may have that tendency to just continue to do something that you feel most comfortable with. And so that's what it means when you're likely to do what's consistent with what you've done in the past. All right. When we make a choice or take a stand, we experience intrapersonal and interpersonal pressure to follow through. So that's within yourself and that's with others. You just have that tendency to want to be able, you get a little bit of pressure, not only the pressure that you put on yourself, but the pressure that others put on you, and in order to do something, to follow through on something. Excuse me. So an example of that, people are most likely to give you money if you first get them to give you the time. So one example of this is maybe you're traveled to a foreign country. Could be somewhere in South America or the Caribbean, and you meet a group of kids, as you see there on the screen. There may be a tendency to, if someone came up to you and came up to them, or one of them came up to you and said, "Excuse me, miss, but do you know what time it is?" And then you look at your watch and you say, "Well, it's 12:30. Okay, thank you so much. Do you think you could spare $1?" They've already kind of caught you. You've committed to giving them something like the time, even though it's something simple like that. You may have that tendency to give them $1. So that's just one example of commitment and consistency. When it comes to commitment and goals, you are 42% more likely to achieve your goal simply by writing it down. Simply by writing it down. So later on this semester for University Express, I'll be talking a little bit more about goals. And that's something to keep in mind, especially when you're thinking about doing something. You may just want to write that goal down on an index card. And one of the things that I've done in the past is on the back of that index card, write down 5 names of people that you're going to tell that that's what your goal is, because you're accountable to them just as they're accountable to you to make sure you're on track with that goal. So when it comes to consistency and commitment, with persuasion, you're more likely to do something, to stay committed to something, if you write it down. The next principle of persuasion is consensus. So I found an image of, for those that are listening in, it's an image of John F. Kennedy, and there's a crowd of people. He's waving to a crowd of people. And obviously this was either just before or during his term as president. And I wanted to talk about that because of consensus. The principle of persuasion when it comes to consensus is, we trust the power of the crowd. We like to be associated with popular things. So on this screen, you might there's this guy that's cheering because he just got a new iPhone. Like back in the days when there was, the iPhone 4 or 5 or 6, I think there's now 12 or 14. I have no idea. But that idea of you want to be part of, you want to do something popular, you want to be part of the crowd. That's part of persuasion. And so whether it is following a political figure like John F. Kennedy, or being part of a crowd because you're all iPhone disciples and you want to get the next iPhone, we trust the power of the crowd to be associated with popular things. One example of this from years past would be the ice bucket challenge, or a walk for just about anything. So it could be the Alzheimer's walk. It could be the walk Pause in the Park with SPCA. You know, those are things that we do because other people are doing them, and we want to be associated with those things. A couple other examples: the Salvation Army Kettle, or an organization that puts a list of donors on an annual report or on a building. And these are all examples of consensus and social proof principle at work. Talking about social proof. So what is social proof? It's persuasion. Once again, it's the influence of the crowd. It's the influence of what others are doing, and you being part of that. So if you are, I'll use this as an example. Again, if you're going out to dinner with some friends and the decision is, where do we go to eat? You know, if 4 or 5 out of 6 or 7 want to go to a particular restaurant, that's persuasion. They might provide some reasons as to why you want to go there. Maybe you didn't necessarily make up your mind, but you're like, okay, well, if they want to go, that's fine. I don't care. I'll go there. An interesting, another way of looking at it from the other point of view would be the old, I think it was a play by, I want to say it was Arthur Miller. I could be wrong, but 12 Angry Men. It's the story of a courtroom, and there's the jurors are trying to decide the fate of the person that's put on trial, and it starts with just one person disagreeing with the others. So there was the tendency to go with the crowd with persuasion, but all it takes is just one person to start being vocal and turn that thing around. But social proof, persuasion, is just another example of consensus. We look to the behavior of others to determine the right way to act. Conformity has its advantages and disadvantages. Why do we conform, and when do you see conformity? So think about that. Why do we conform, and when do you see conformity? And how might this strategy be applied to change minds? On the screen, I took a couple screenshots of a video that I like to show during when I'm in-person presentations, and it's a screenshot of candid camera, or a hidden camera show. This was done back in the 1960s. And the idea here, when it comes to conformity, is there's a man that is in an elevator, and of course he's standing in the back of the elevator, and just as anyone would stand in an elevator, you stand facing the door. Well, the hired personnel, the hired actors, what they did one by one is they entered the elevator and looked at the back wall. All right, so one person entered and they're basically staring at the guy who is not the actor. Another person walks in, they're looking at the back wall. And then finally, just through conformity, the person that's not the actor ends up turning around and facing the wall, purely because of what other people are doing. And so that's just one example of conformity. If you want to check it out, I would just go to like YouTube, and you could probably just do a search for candid camera elevator experiment or something like that. That was just, something that I like to show when I'm in person giving presentations. Conformity, like I said, is a type of social influence involving a change in belief. Group pressure may take different forms. For example, bullying, persuasion, of course, teasing or criticism. Conformity is also known as majority influence or group pressure. And where might you see conformity? Could be in, today's political persuasions as well. Like I said, you've got on my screen shows the symbol for the Republican Party and the symbol for the Democrat Party. And there's certainly, if you're not, if you don't look into the issues one way or the other, you may have the tendency to conform, to go with the crowd of people that you are most associated with. So they could be friends, they could be families, although when it comes to politics, sometimes that separation can be, it's a tricky thing. So, but there is the concept of conformity when it comes to political persuasion. And then the last principle that I want to cover is likability. All right. So liking, it's the final weapon and the most arguably the most powerful. It's very difficult to say no to someone that is liked. And how do we gain liking from others? It could be attraction, it could be similarity. And on my screen, and you may have seen this through social media, or it's probably done mostly through social media. But there's a picture of someone, and you click on, well, who am I most like? Is it, in this instance, there's a woman? Is it Sigourney Weaver? Is it Holly Hunter, Julie Andrews, Madeleine Albright? People sometimes have the tendency to like someone because they look like someone. So there is that concept of likability when it comes to persuasion. Who are some of the most well-liked people you know? All right, so think about that for a moment. Think about the qualities of a person that you like. And is it because you like that person that you're more apt to listen to them? If they were to say, you should really read this book because I think you'll love it. Well, okay, maybe it's something that I wouldn't necessarily read, but since I like you, I might give it a shot. And a few examples that I have here, Michael J. Fox. I mean, sometimes when I'm with some friends or something, I might just try to get a rise out of them and be like, oh, Michael J. Fox, he's such a jerk. But who says Michael J. Fox is a jerk? He's like one of the most liked actors of all time. Another person, although she's been in the news recently, is Ellen DeGeneres. Like, a lot of people like her. It doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman. A lot of people like Ellen. And of course, living in Buffalo, living in Western New York, you've got Jim Kelly, I think James Lofton there, and Thurman Thomas. We like them. Of course, we love them. They're the Buffalo Bills. But why is this concept of likability so important when it comes to persuasion? I'll tell you why. It's because someone like Michael J. Fox, of course, he suffers from Parkinson's, but he is used as a spokesperson to talk about Parkinson's because he's well liked, of course. And in this instance, he's suffering from a debilitating disease like Parkinson's. But because you associate someone that you like with another cause or with a product or with a service, that's where the principle of persuasion comes in. Another example would be Ellen. Here is an ad that's on the screen for CoverGirl, Olay, and if she's holding a raccoon for some reason. But companies will select people that are well liked in order to persuade the person to purchase a product or a service. It's done all the time. You could think back to, the advent of radio and television. You are more likely to purchase something or to do something if someone that you know that's well liked is able to pitch that product or service. Compliments. Here's a cartoon It's two ducks that are talking to each other, and it says, your camera takes really nice pictures. And they're staring at each other. And then the other duck says, your mouth makes really nice compliments. So the likability in this instance is also reciprocity. And so when one person says something, you want to return that favor, but compliments go a long way when it comes to likability. All right. If you're trying to persuade somebody to win someone over, you're more likely to do that with compliments. I'm not telling you something that you didn't already know. But maybe when it comes to one of the 6 principles of persuasion, you might say, well, oh, I guess when I do that, maybe I am persuading someone in a good way. So compliments it ties right in with likability. People like genuine compliments. And the key word there is genuine. They need to be coming from the heart. Next screen here says, what can be the side effects of? There's a big thumbs up. And if you're on social media, Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever, TikTok, I'm not involved too much with TikTok yet, but my daughter is. What are some of the side effects of likability? So there's this concept of wanting to get likes because of a photo that you post or a video or something that you do. And I just wanted to share this little headline that I found. Being authentic on Facebook is better for your mental health, researchers say. And this is just an article I found on CNN, exotic vacation pictures, shots of healthy meals, which I still don't get, flattering selfies. Whether you're on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, or TikTok, many people make huge efforts to curate the best version of themselves online. And this is an emphasis here, but it might be better for your mental health not to craft an idealized view of yourself when using social media, according to a new study in Nature Communications. There are psychological benefits associated with being authentic when it comes to Facebook posts and likes, a team of researchers at New York's Columbia Business School and Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management in Chicago found. This headline was just from like 2 or 3 days ago. And I think like that's part of the society that we're living in. Like you want to get all these likes. You might feel a little bit better because 50 people or 100 people or 1,000 people liked a particular image. But if it's not authentic, and I think that that's a tendency when it comes to social media, is that there are some people that just portray their best possible self, but in reality, deep down, they might be hurting. And so when it comes going back to likability and persuasion, just like compliments, just like social media, you want to be authentic. All right, so we went through reciprocity, scarcity, authority, commitment, consensus, and likability. Those were the 6 principles that I wanted to get you through today. And now I'm going to go through a few examples before we wrap some things up. And if there's any questions that came in, I would say if you have any questions, maybe send them in now to Katie, and then at the end, we can try to address those. So what are some examples of the 6 principles that you might experience? All right. What's on the screen here? What principles are used when trying to sell a timeshare? If you've ever been on vacation, gone somewhere, what are some of the tactics, now that you've known some of these principles, that are used when selling a timeshare? Is it reciprocity, scarcity, authority, commitment, consensus, or likability? So take a few seconds and think about it. Okay. If you said, well, where it is. If you said reciprocity, You were correct. When you think about timeshares, they are giving you, it could be $50, it could be a free dinner in return for your time. And so when it comes to reciprocity, you are giving them something, you are getting something back from them. Scarcity. It's kind of one of those things, the fear of missing out, the FOMO principle. If you need to sign up today for the timeshare, otherwise you're done. Like, it's the decision, you have 28 hours or 24 hours or 48 hours to make a decision, or before you leave from this resort. That concept of scarcity is used. And commitment, signing on the dotted line. Are you committed to doing something? Even when you decide that you're going to go on a 2-hour or 4-hour discussion around timeshare, you've got to commit to it something as well. All right. And likability. I just kind of threw that in there at the end as well, because if you have somebody that is really likable when they're talking to you about the timeshare, you might be more apt to want to learn more, or you may be more willing to actually sign up for a timeshare. All right. What principles are used in this example? And you could see on the screen, it is a direct mail from Nielsen, which is a survey company. You may have received this, where they put $2 in the mail to fill out a survey. Another example of this would be there's an envelope with a St. Christopher medal. So a mission, I was talking to my mom this morning and I said, what are some of the missionaries that you get medals from in the mail? And then the last one was a mailing label. So there are different nonprofit organizations that might send you a sheet of 50 mailing labels. And what are the principles that are used in these examples? So you think about it: a Nielsen survey, a religious medal, or mailing labels. When you get something in the mail, when you get a direct mail, what are the principles? If you said reciprocity, you are correct. You're getting something, you're feeling bad about it in a certain way, so you want to give something back. So you get money, yeah, I'll fill out the survey. Or if you get a medal from a religious organization, I'll send them $10 or whatever. Yeah, it's fine. I'm getting something, I got to give something back. Same thing with the mailing labels. All right. And commitment, once again, going back to commitment. So if you said reciprocity and commitment, you are correct. What principles are used in this example? There's a picture of a crowd of people dumping water, ice bucket water on their head. I think we used this example earlier. And since this is University Express, hopefully you know the answer to this. If you said commitment, you are correct. And consensus, following the crowd. So if there's a crowd of people doing it, you don't want to miss out. I guess you're going to do it then. You felt guilty. I remember it was probably 10 years ago they did the ice bucket challenge, and I was like, I don't want to do this, but if someone challenged me, I guess I got to do it. One principles are used in this example. It's a picture of, if you're not familiar, that's LeBron James. LeBron James, and he's promoting Sprite. Is it reciprocity, likability, consensus, scarcity, authority, or commitment? If you said likability, you are correct. If you like LeBron James, you may be more inclined, you may be persuaded to drink Sprite. That's true. And finally, I threw this in there. This is a picture of a doctor holding a cigarette. And it says, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. More doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. So when you think about persuasion, what principles were used in this particular example? I can't, like, it's crazy to think about this. But if you said authority, you're correct. Because this comes from a person that has the credentials, and if they're smoking Camel cigarettes, then man, there must be something great about Camels, and I should buy those. And consensus, if doctors are smoking Camels, maybe I should smoke Camels too. So just to recap, goals of today, understanding terminology, knowing the tools, putting them in your toolbox, defending yourself against weapons, because now that you know what those principles are, you may be able to react in a different way. You can use these strategies sometimes when it comes to preserving relationships and, of course, learning something new. And those are the 6 principles again. There's Piper barking, reciprocity, scarcity, authority, commitment, consensus, and likability. And the last thing before I'll go through any questions, and then we're just a few seconds out, is this concept of persuasion. Now, Persuasion is written by Robert Cialdini, the same author. And the concept of persuasion is those moments before you actually have a discussion with someone are critical when it comes to persuasion. So one example that he used in this particular book was there was a man who was looking to get a new job. So he walked into the company, he gave them his resume, or they had his resume, and before the interview started, he would say to the interviewer, now, what was it from my resume, from my credentials, that made you want to bring me in today for the interview? And he found that when you do something like that, when you put the focus on you make a person react to find out on that piece of paper, that resume, that person has these particular qualities. They're focusing on why they brought you in. It's already a positive moment. So when you're going in for an interview, and I talk to this when I give this presentation in front of college students or whatever, is that sometimes it's like that moment before an event happens that makes a big deal when it comes to persuasion. So his definition was the process of arranging for recipients to be receptive to a message before they encounter it, strategically guiding preliminary attention to move prospects into an agreement with the marketing message before they even experience it. This is this is a video from PBS NewsHour. Robert Cialdini is talking about it. So if obviously you're all on computers, I'm not going to show the video because it's about 7 or 8 minutes, but he talks about the psychological trick behind getting people to say yes. I would encourage you to check that out. If you go to YouTube, search Cialdini, Pre-suasion, PBS NewsHour, and you should check it out. It's a great video. So with that, I think we just about wrap things up. Katie, was there any other questions that came in?
I'm seeing a couple comments.
Okay.
One is Tom Sawyer is an example of persuasion.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
The next thing I'm seeing is this person wants you to know that the makeup was to cover up dark circles, hence the raccoon.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
And then a person, when you're talking about Facebook, commented, very true, often called fake book.
Fake book. That's right. That is true.
And I'm seeing quite a few thank yous.
That's great. Awesome. Well, I thank you, Katie. Thank you for doing this. You do a fantastic job with University Express. I want to give you a major plug, and I'm being reciprocal. Did you catch that?
I did. Thank you.
So you do an awesome job. Thanks everybody for listening in. I'll let Katie finish off, but If you like today's presentation, I'm going to be doing another one on a different topic later this year, so come and check that out. And if you have any other questions, by all means, you can shoot them to Katie, and I'd be happy to answer those as well.
Yeah, thank you. We'll have Rob back Friday, December 11th at 10 a.m. for his Ready, Set, Goals. He's actually going to be the last last class of our semester, which sets us up nicely for the new year. So again, everybody, thank you. Saying thank you, enjoyed very much. Awesome. Rob, as always, it's awesome to work with you. And I hope everyone has a great day and a good weekend, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
All right.